all happened for you. Today's topic, we're going to tackle like three of them. So I hope you hold on to your hats. Actually, I have one in limbo that we might attack, but we probably have enough to talk about here. Um, One of the things we haven't tackled yet on the show, Damien, is the idea of code calling. I know a lot of people think that that's kind of ancient history, but it is something that still happens, and for some people, that technique works. Overall, what are your thoughts about it?
I think that it is very courageous to be able to pick up the phone and call someone you don't know.
Mhm.
However, with an instrument like LinkedIn, you can hopefully reduce how cold the cold call is by connecting with that person through LinkedIn and establishing some sort of link so that when you call, it's still a cold call because they don't know you and they've never heard about you, but at least by linking in with that person, they'll get a feel for who you are and what you've done in your career simply by looking at your profile. But it is, well, I'll just give you this one example.
Mhm.
Um, when I was out of work, um, picking up the phone to me um, felt like I was trying to pick up an elephant because it was just so difficult for me to do. Um,
Mhm.
Eventually, I did, but I think the point of what I'm trying to make is do everything you can first to try to connect with this person in other ways before you pick up the phone and call.
Yeah, to me, it's like door knocking back in the day. Whenever you worked for a nonprofit organization, you do campaigning. That could be quite intense. Not to go deep into it, but probably my most infamous, um, um, crack at door knocking was having to do a campaign at a Michigan State football game in Lansing, Michigan.
Ooh.
Believe me, while everybody's doing the trailer thing, uh, trying to pitch whatever your campaign was at that particular time was definitely out of place. But it did break me of a lot of insecurities that I had about doing it. Having said that, if you do it enough, you can break some of the insecurities about it, and you can actually learn a lot about yourself and how you are as a conversation starter or a conversationalist. But at times too, there needs to be some kind of strategy that goes along with it, because for sure, people, if they feel like you're wasting their time, then you can actually run into a brick wall and some resistance, and even some cases, some return fire that you perhaps don't want. It's likely that if you're cold calling, and this is not to say that you should use this as foolproof strategy, but there are some people out there who are willing to call 400 CEOs to see if they'll get a shot at being an intern, or to get an entry level position, or to get something similar to that, to where they get somebody's attention. And sometimes, in the person at the top is no big deal for them. They'll say, I like this kid, see if you could do something for him, many times. And many times that's how careers get started. But of course, we don't live in that age anymore. And perhaps, if anything, it might seem a little intrusive, unless, of course, you build some kind of presence over time, like on LinkedIn. And if you know that their attention is there, if that hiring manager's attention is all about the attention, when it comes to getting somebody's to be responsive when it comes to LinkedIn. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I have found that, again, you're working with a stranger, but if they have been in a business news article or even your local paper, taking the time to connect with them by doing something as easy as sending them a copy of the article through the mail, because these days, anytime you get anything through the US Post Office, and it's not junk mail, it's an event because it just doesn't happen anymore. It shows the person that you're trying to connect with that you are willing to connect with them for a reason that is good for the person, not for you. And another thing is, especially if you're unemployed, hitting the person up like both barrels with, I need you, I need a job, you're the person that's going to make it happen, is the quickest way to end any chance of ever getting a return call or any type of conversation with the individual that you're trying so hard to connect with. And there are, and I don't know, Mark, if you've used these strategies, but um, if you call a half an hour before the business opens,
Mm-hmm.
or a half an hour after the business closes, many times there's a greater likelihood that this person is going to pick up the phone, because if they have a gatekeeper where their calls are routed to, well, that gatekeeper has already gone home.
Mm-hmm.
And many times the person will kind of reflexively pick up the phone, and now it's just the two of you. That said, you need to have a practiced, prepared script so that when you are startled and you actually make a connection with a real human being, you're not and Owen and what have you. You just have a very clear message that you're trying to send. And the most important one is, you would like to spend 20 minutes of their time to learn more about them and their success in their career, or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm in fan of all definitely understanding the habits of the business and doing enough research to where when I know that I'm calling, that somebody's, I want to like know who's going to respond. Whether it's the person like my doctor, surprisingly, is one of the few doctors probably in the whole world where you can call an hour before business opens, and he's the one that answers and is able to help you along. Not everybody in the world who's in that kind of position is like that. You're going to likely get somebody automated, an overnight person, representative to replace that call or that caller ID or call a voicemail. Um, I'm in fan of getting the familiarity down to a science to some degree, and maybe even had one at least touch to make that call as warm as possible before you call. Um, I know that a lot of people feel like cover letters are like so out of date and all that kind of thing. I don't think they're completely out of date yet. And I think in fact, people are making that assumption so much that that is probably the one way that you could even stand out. But you could use a cover letter format to kind of get some familiarity if you're able to find out the right email address or like right uh, LinkedIn account, which is probably the easier thing to do. And then you go ahead and send that ahead of time. I would say even to make it as short, if not shorter than a cover letter, to kind of get right to the point, because busy people who hire don't have a lot of time for fluff and all that. Unless, of course, you can do the other thing too, is that if you know what that person likes, you know somewhat the personality and the MO and how he or she responds, and perhaps they're a great conversationalist. You could start a conversation that you can pick up, so that when you call, you can pick up on that conversation at first and break the ice. There's plenty of them I've talked about in the past, how there's some of them surprisingly have done, not surprisingly, but depending how high up or that person, they've done maybe a presentation that was done at an industry conference. They've done a podcast that's related in their industry. There's something that that person has done. The way you could say, "Hey, I really enjoyed your presentation. You made a couple of really great points in that particular interview, presentation, speech, etc. Is it okay? I can call you and we could talk a little bit more about that, and use that as kind of a way to do sort of a informational interview slash let's see where we can go with this kind of conversation. I mean, really, there's no particular rules that are going to be right or wrong. But like I said, there are people who are out there who are willing to call 400 CEOs or hiring managers and say, hey, can I fit in somewhere? And you can likely get a shot. To me, that's a little bit better than sending out 400 resumes, hoping that somebody responds. And at least you would have people, names and places of people where they are and what their schedule is that you can actually call and follow up. And I think that's even more of a key that, if you're cold calling, you got to look for the opportunity to follow up, because the more touches you have, the more familiarity you create, and more familiarity you create, the more chances you're able to get some kind of meeting with that company or inside that company.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the idea of sending a cover letter, requesting a meeting, is something that I recommend all the
Mhm.
time, because he gets a message from, or she gets a message from Damian Burkle. Well, they have no idea who this person is. Now they may look you up on LinkedIn, but you can send a very short and effective cover letter talking about either the touch or a person that
Mhm.
that they already know, and just very quickly, dear so and so, in a recent conversation with, he suggested that I contact you to learn more about, and then you have 5 questions. How did your career begin? What do you like most about the business? What do you like least? How has the business changed throughout your career? And then one other question that is very industry specific. Then you say, I am very much looking forward to having the opportunity to meet with you. You will hear from me shortly. And when you say that, you can use that key sentence, you will hear from me shortly, on virtually any communication that you send, because what you've done is you've just given yourself permission to follow up.
Mhm.
And another trick that I've used is, if you get caught by a gatekeeper, you can call, and he or she will say, well, what is the purpose of your call? And you can say, it's of personal importance, and you're not lying, because it is of personal importance to you. And the advantage of sending a cover letter telling them exactly why you want to come is there's no confusion. And to backtrack, there is one other critical question that needs to be in the cover letter, which is, I do not expect you to know or have a job for me. Because what
Mhm.
you've done there is you have let them off the hook right away by clearly saying, I am coming to you for information, not a
Mhm.
job.
Right.
Now, they might have a job for you, but you cannot network with integrity, make a cold call, have a cold meeting, um, going into it with the expectation that there is, something that's going to happen in the way of a job. Your uh, viewpoint should be, I am going to go in, I'm going to meet a great person, and I am going to learn um, a lot about them. And oh, by the way, you only asked for 20 minutes of their time. Now, I don't know of anybody out there that I've ever run into that didn't have at least 20 minutes of their time to give to you in a properly placed sequence of events that allows that person to feel confident that you're coming in for a very short amount of time. You've already set the agenda for the meeting. And when you come in, they already know why you're there. And so there isn't any fumbling. I would always bring a copy of the letter with me because sometimes, we'd schedule out 2, 3, 4 weeks and I'd have the letter. And if need be, I would hand it to them so they, get it real quick and boom, we were off to the races.
Yeah, being that we're not in person as much, even though that's oncoming, um, I think even I found when I've advised on doing informational interviews or some kind of meeting to ask for 10 to 15 minutes because that's kind of under the ideal of a break, that you're just taking a
Good.
little break time,
Mhm.
or less than a break time to ask a few questions. That means you have to go and prepare in such a way that way you can get right to the point of the heart of building familiarity or building a relationship. um, and I think ultimately that's all people need. If you say 20 minutes, I think a lot of times, and not negating at all what you're saying, Damien, is it definitely doesn't break them to do 20 minutes. Sometimes for them, 20 minutes is a lot, depending upon who it is and high up on the ladder that person is. You can gauge that if you can even uh, see if you could connect somebody within the company and see how that person is, so you can get an idea. They can perhaps might be able to tell you or find out if what kind of time would they let me talk to them for 20 minutes or for 10 minutes. But yeah, the cold calling thing, I think, really, you're just growing some familiarity. You're just trying to have is to start a relationship of some type. And when I say relationship, where they feel comfortable in talking to you, knowing your name, and that you've solidified your interest in the industry and perhaps even furthering yourself. If you are in the audience watching us, and we do have a few viewers, some of them are even casually just watching, feel free to drop a comment in the chat box. Have you ever tried cold calling? Let us know what your experience is. Let us know, was it something that was a terrible experience for you? Was it a great experience? Let us know. We'll be glad to respond to that and maybe give some advice regarding that. That kind of leads to the chance that in a rare opportunity where that conversation, that relationship kind of goes on into a virtual relationship. And the aspect of virtual relationship, there's many things we talked about. We've talked about interviews at nauseum on this show, and I don't want to bang it completely in to a place to where you can't take the nail out if you need to. But I think one of the things that people are understanding, that logistics are everything, understanding who you're interviewing with and what it requires to have a virtual interview to be the most productive. I think people are going in having interviews, and but they're not going in being informed about the interview process. One of the problems I think I've seen lately out of all the comments is that people aren't going in not understanding completely what that virtual experience is going to be like. And it's very important for people to ask a lot of questions, or enough questions, before they start the process, so they have an idea and they have an idea on how to prepare. Some thoughts on preparation for virtual interviews, Damien?
And point of clarification, are we talking about informational interviews or job interview?
We've established that it's going to be a job interview. But the problem many times, the people are going in and not knowing enough about the position in order to know what to ask. I think in part, in going into a virtual interview is that you also are familiar with the process. Some people think they're going to talk to a person, which
Right.
they may not know that that they may even just talk to an automation software,
Mhm.
which may include some video. You may have to record that video. And I think we've even talked about how I've heard back from folks where they've gone into, they're told they're going to have an interview, then that very day they're sent a link to go to wherever the site is, and that they're to prepare, they have a chance to prepare an interview, uh, and do some practice, and then they're expected to perform in front of a camera by asking questions that are intermittently asked. You've got 30 to 60 to 90 seconds to answer that particular question. Maybe that might be 4 or 5 questions. And then they might even be generous enough to give you, say, is there anything else that you want to add? And you're based on that. Your interview is based on the response of that particular automation software tool. Now, the sad thing about it is that that person has never met a person, and they can get rejected without even saying. And if you're not prepared for it, you are kind of up a creek as far as that company. It could possibly even be your dream company that you had hopes on it. So that's why I'm kind of drawing the scenario from what I'm hearing from folks, is that they're having this real life experience where real life isn't panning out so well.
Right. And I agree with you. My daughter went through that, where she was sent a link, and you're right. They ask you a question, you're asked to perform. I think in her case, she got 3 chances per question,
Hmm.
uh, and she passed it. And then the next thing is, she was brought into a room with 100 other people, and they were given a case study. And then one person out of the table of however many tables there were gave a report. And then they did kind of a round robin interview. And then out of 100 people, I think maybe 5 were chosen to have in-depth interviews with real people.
Hmm.
Um, but when it comes to asking questions, you would like to know things like, uh, how long has the position been open? Um, uh, how long has the position been open? What is a typical day like in this position? Uh, where does the position that I fall and the people that I report to fall within the company? Because it's nice to know if you're going into a growth situation, a stable situation, or
Hmm.
a situation that's going downhill.
Hmm.
Um, and again, you're not going to have a lot of time. So 4, maybe 5 questions, and whether you're doing it online with a software interview, or if you're doing it in person, being given the opportunity to ask those questions usually
Hmm.
comes at the very end of the meeting, when the person who's interviewing you says, "Do you have any questions?" As soon as you hear that, then you know that the interview has rounded the bend and is moving towards conclusion. And having these questions is an expectation of the person who is interviewing you.
Hmm.
And again, you can learn a lot about a position based on the questions that you ask, because you, as an interviewee, have as much right to interview the interviewer.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, I mean, yes, you can be qualified, but if there isn't a cultural match, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
And I think that's where the horse and the buggy aren't going to the same place. In this new environment, many of the companies, when you do interview with the software, you don't get a chance to ask those questions at the end. It's completely based off of your responses, excuse me, through the interviewer. So it brings on the challenges that there's not that interaction that you can rely on, nor is there any chemistry can you build with a particular software. You have to be autonomously comfortable enough with whatever method that you're using to make yourself seem appealing for a company to get in front of. Now, I don't think it matters on what kind of personality, whether if you're outgoing or whether you're introvert, and that talking to someone who is not physically there in front of you um, usually matters. But I guess ultimately is that people need to be reminded that these things are going or is based completely off of artificial intelligence. So
Yes,
what it becomes is it becomes this mystery that you're talking. It's like giving a speech in front of three people, but there's 1,000 seats, and you probably won't hear the clapping. You won't hear a response, and there's no way to give a proper response to know that your message has been received. And that could be quite difficult. And I think people have to be aware, um, depending on your position, of course, on what that's going to look like now and what you're preparing for. So even though you practice in front of someone and get that feedback, you may not even get a verbal feedback right away in a lot of cases where they are using that automation software to use other factors that you probably wouldn't even be able to prepare for. All you would have a chance to do is prepare for responding to those questions and responding in a way that's comprehensible and understandable to the employer, to the point to where they feel like you're a good fit. And it may be as well that the software decides that for them and will only bring in, if 100 people did the video interview, they may only allow them a certain small percentage to be seen ever. So you might not ever be seen in some cases. So not everybody has the same process. This is not meant to scare you at all, but this is kind of time to prepare and start to think through what the possibilities are, and perhaps find out that information before you get to the interview is ultimately is going to be the sweet spot.
and just a kind of a tip, and I had to learn this the hard way. You know,
Mhm,
the tendency when you're interviewing is to try to look at the person in the eye, and what that does
mhm,
is that actually takes your sight down because you're
mhm,
looking at the screen. And what I did is I took like a little picture and put the picture right above the camera. And so when I was doing the interviewing, I would look at the picture of the person and
mhm,
therefore create eye contact. Because when you're being measured by artificial intelligence, things like tone of your voice, eye contact, body language, all of those
mhm,
things are measured. And I mean, even though it quote unquote standardizes the hiring process, you as a job searcher never see the results. And that's been my experience, anyways. And
mhm,
um, when you agree to take these tests, it is the property of the company that's
mhm.
interviewing you. And what's lost in this whole thing is the human touch. Now,
Yeah.
there really isn't a lot you can do about that, other than the things that you and I have talked about, and also the need to take you up like 125%, almost to the point where
Mhm,
you're overacting. And the reason why is because if you don't bring up yourself, smile more, have more eye contact, you're going to come across to the people on the other side as being kind of flat, even
Right.
though, if you were being seen in person, you would be
Mhm.
seen as very enthusiastic. And so it is a fine art to be interviewed by software, and it is a different strategy. And I'm glad we had an opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, so am I. And I think the audio is very important as well, that you
Mhm.
test all that. But I think Zoom is such a great tool to use because you can record exactly how you're going to look at the camera and where your eyes need to be before you have the video interview. Because what
Mhm.
doesn't change is the your physical presence and what you create for the video. You
Mhm.
get complete control of that. It does help to have a lot of space in between, not to be distracted by anything. I sit in front of my only thing I sit in front of in the back of me right now is basically a wall and a place for the thermometer. And sometimes even people say the thermometer is distracting. I don't think it's distracting as people of it because people are more interested into the content that they are what's in back of you. Although there are times when you can have too much going on, and that could take away that person's experience. And that's what you want to get an idea of is that person's experience when they talk to you and when you talk. Are you talking with enough inflection? Are you clearing your thoughts? Are you hemming and hawing a lot? And that may or may not count. I'm not sure. But it depends. There's so much that goes into a video interview. You just want to be prepared as much as you can. But I do think mostly you want to be prepared. Um, for the interview and how you come across and just be aware enough on the things that you can control and not the things that you can't control. Did you want to add anything to that, Damien, as we move on to the next question?
Yes. Many times as a job searcher, you are not used to hearing your own voice and seeing your own image when you're interviewing.
Hmm.
Don't worry about it. Do the very best you can. And don't get intimidated by your you on camera or the way that you sound, or for that matter, the way that the interview is run via software. I mean,
Hmm.
you're talking to software. I mean, it's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. And as I said earlier, many times if you botch the answer, you have another two times, and do the very best you can. And at the end of the interview, you did the best you could, you prepared the best way, and you're done and go on to the next opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Um, if you're having virtual interviews or if you're lacking interviews, feel free to let us know at the chat and feel free to ask questions, and we'll actually answer any question that you ask today. It's one of those days where we're free flowing. I put my ear to the virtual streets, and these things come up. So these are the things that people are concerned about right now. One of the other things that has come up, and we discussed this on the other show, which I hope to bring you on as a guest here over the next few weeks if you're available. Reference checks are becoming a very interesting conversation. There are several things that are going on, and I don't know even where to even begin in talking about it because there's someone that recently told me that they were actually let go, they were terminated, and they were very concerned about the company coming back to them and asking them about their experience and why they were. But they didn't get that question. In fact, it was even probably one of the shortest hiring uh, hirings that I've seen in a long time. They had some familiarity, and they were able to. They got a referral, and they went back for 2 days worth of interviewing, and they were hired without a reference check. I
Hmm.
thought that was so very interesting, and a fairly, it wasn't a small company. I would even say it wasn't even a mid-sized company. It was kind of large. I've heard a couple of scenarios like that. The other scenario I think we've talked about, and I'll bring it up again, where somebody interviewed for a fairly high level position, and they were vetted, but the person was savvy enough to vet them and also do their research and what have you. And they were actually paid $100 for their time. Uh,
Right,
so,
right, right.
so
I
yeah,
remember
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And the reason is that I don't know if we're seeing that reference checks are starting to take a small little turn, but I bring that up in part because before the pandemic, there were retail organizations that were skipping the reference check part. I don't know if that's going to go back to that or what kind of turn, but I think uh, in adding to that, there's also the experience that people need more references than they ever had. And I think I mentioned before in passing, and I didn't talk specifically about it, that people are needing more than 3 reference checks. They need more than 3 people to vouch for them. I thought that was really interesting. I just was curious about what you've heard and what people may have even been telling you. Are you seeing more of the traditional, or are you seeing a new wave of a process to where reference checks are being something that's being diminished in the process, or maybe you're seeing something that's becoming a bigger deal than it's ever had?
I'm actually seeing both, much like you, Mark. I
Mm,
think the the time that it takes to track down references, uh, and with everybody working from their homes,
mhm,
that just the whole complexity of trying to run a company where everybody is scattered could certainly be impacting the time
mhm,
and willingness to check references. And with everybody on cell phones um, and email and LinkedIn and so on and so forth, uh,
mhm,
in the quote unquote old days, you had a sizable number of people in human resources, but what has happened over time is with the growth of applicant tracking systems, artificial intelligence, the number of human resource people continues to shrink. And
mhm,
there's only so much that a person can do in an 8 to 10 hour day. So that's one slice that I'm seeing. But on the
mhm,
other, on some of the higher level uh, folks that have gone back to work, yeah, I am seeing reference checks uh, pretty
mhm,
much as normal. But what I'd like to or interject rather, here is that it is your responsibility as a job searcher to feed and nourish your references. And what I
mhm,
mean by that is you need to stay in charge of when you reveal to the hiring manager or whoever your references. And
mhm,
I can't tell you the number of people who have sabotaged their own campaigns by, at the bottom of their resume, listing their references or sending their resume with a separate sheet with their references, because then HR checks their references and they haven't followed protocol, which I'm going to talk about in a second.
mhm,
And they may get a first call, but nothing else. Um, Feed and nourish your references in the following way. You want to keep in touch with them throughout your job search campaign.
mhm,
When you suspect that your references are going to be checked, send out a quick email and say something like, Dear Mark, thank you for being one of my references. I interviewed with the May Company. You may receive a call from uh, Joe Jones. Uh, if you do and have the opportunity, could you emphasize the following things and then give him 5 bullet points? And you do that through your chain of references. And you do that for a very important reason. And that is, by the time a company is checking your references, they've made the decision to hire you.
Right.
When they check your references, it's the last step. And the only thing they want is good news and consistency. But if you don't control your references, don't control the flow of information, and don't provide them with the key critical things that you want them to talk about, then they could talk about anything when they get a phone call. If you guide them and say, these are the things I'd like you to talk about, as your references are checked, it's good news and it's the same news. It's the same story being painted differently by the various people that serve as your references. And that makes the HR manager feel good. It makes the hiring manager feel good because of the fact that they know that they made the right decision because the references are reinforcing the hiring decision that they've already made.
Yes, you brought up a whole bunch of thoughts on that because I've written several articles about reference checks and how the process. And since you went down that road, I'm going to continue on that road. There's a couple of things that I think that is really important. One, and I've mentioned this in past shows. I can't remember if I mentioned it in this show or the Wednesday show, but one of the things that people often don't do is they still hold on to the grade for reference they got in 15, 20 years ago, and that person has moved on from that industry, no longer in management, and really can't speak to you using Lotus 123. So that could be a problem these days as people are looking up for the most relevant skills that you possess and that has made your career possible at this particular point. So they're going to be asking those kind of questions, and they're going to ask for particularly what was it like working with you 15, 20 years ago, because they understand people have changed either for the better or for the worse. So you don't want to keep them guessing. I think you want to have the references that can talk to the most relevant skills to that particular job. And I would even say that you want to have some people who can really speak strongly to your competency and to how you've been able to adjust and your agility throughout your career as far as they can see. So let's say you pick somebody that worked with you 8 years ago, and that person can speak to how you are very important to adding value to the culture, and even talk about some of your leadership skills. That's what one person could do. And that's what you can be sure you communicate to that person. Say, hey, the more than likely they're going to ask about these particular areas. And and you want to ask, do you think that was a strength? Do you think that was a liability? And that, of course, if you kept in touch with them, they're going to speak to all of your strengths. They don't want to ruin you or ruin your career, but you want them to be relevant in the way they speak about it. And then you might want to have somebody speak to another area, and all those areas are areas of strength. And you should be able to you should have an idea of what they're going to say before the interview process, because those are the things you're going to interject all throughout the interview, so that when they call a reference, they're just rehashing and just confirming everything you said. So you want to be very judicious in who you pick as a reference. It helps to have 5, 6, 7 people who can give you reference. It's even great these days if it's been the last 10 years And you know, LinkedIn has been the thing to use, that they've written some kind of recommendation for you on LinkedIn so that they can read it, they can also talk to it, and all the questions have been answered, all the boxes have been checked. So I think there'll come a time when LinkedIn will be a better place for references, because they talk about, especially if you have people who are active on LinkedIn, who are writing reviews and recommendations for other people, that is a great place to do it. If you have, by chance, if there were other ways to show that you have people who can vouch for you, that's great. I was doing the presentation yesterday that we had
Yeah.
talked about before. And one of the things I mentioned was the fact that someone in my job lab uses MailChimp as a way to have a newsletter and keep people abreast of what he's doing. I really recommend that strategy if you could do it. It's free, and it could be free for years as long as you want to use it. You can have up to, I think, about 2,000 people before they even consider charging you. So of course,
Wow.
more than likely, the average person is not going to have even 200. But the point being is that you have people, even if it's just 30, you're sending a newsletter and having that to grow, to say, hey, these are things that are happening to me. This is what I'm doing to grow my career. I appreciate any thoughts. And then you have your own little small community of advisors for your career, and you can keep that going while you're even working, so that the next time that you're ready to make a leap, you're prepared, because your network is prepared, because you've kept them on, even if it's just once a month. I would say
Mhm.
even if it was just once every 2 months, it would still be a lot better for than most people would, because most people don't, only activate their references when they need it, and sometimes that could be for years. So I think those things could be very helpful along the way. Did you have anything that you want to add to that, Damien?
Yes, if you get into a situation like I did, where you lose your job because you have an instant personality conflict,
Hmm.
I was not going to, technically, he was my boss, very
Hmm.
short amount of time, less than a year. Uh, I didn't like him. He didn't
Hmm.
like me, but I
Hmm.
still needed a reference. And so what I did was I rolled back one boss to my retail
Good,
godfather.
good point. Great point.
And he stood up for me across multiple references. I'm still in
Hmm.
touch with him today. And so if you do get into a situation where you're worried about your references, find somebody within the company that will stand up for you. And it doesn't have to be your boss, it doesn't have to be human resources. And, have someone that will kind of fall into line with the information that you are trying to communicate across
Hmm.
multiple references.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think the reason why I like the idea of having people write recommendations on LinkedIn, it cuts out all the guesswork. So what was that person really like? Obviously, if they read the recommendation, they like you, they know you, and they'll grow trust for you even before they even have to call. That's why I think it's even great so they don't have to have the competency culture aspect of it. They'll now just want to hear from the person, what would you like? And obviously they'll want to hire you. That company will go past even the more traditional questions. Would you hire them again? They don't have to, because obviously this person had a great experience with you, and you're making sure that you're asking for recommendations from the best people who have the best things to say about you. Now, I'm not saying all of your recommendations need to say that, but the ones who are doing references for you will is better. It's a better strategy that they are priming the pump, and that
Yes.
and
Mhm.
that even greater still, that people who are recruiting will go by and read that's a passive way for you to get job leads, because then somebody's coming after you. And I think in this day and age, is that if you don't have somebody chasing, as you're chasing other people, there should be other people chasing you, sort of like dating in a lot of ways. You have people who like you and the people you like, and there's some that are pursuing you and some you're pursuing. That's what it makes it a great experience. What makes it a powerful experience in hiring is that you know that people are, you know why people are chasing you. It's not a guess because you put your best recommendations out there. You've even gone take the time to make PowerPoint presentations to put on SlideShare and make sure that's available on LinkedIn. That you've even maybe had a podcast interview that you were involved with. That you put your best out there. They have a lot of sample sizes. The more sample size people will just want to engage you, that they don't have to guess. Could you be? Might you be? They've heard you speak. They've read what your thoughts are, and they've heard what people said about you. All those things are consistent. Now the interest is would you be interested in working for them? And that's a much more powerful position than having to always chase and to get somebody to give you the look. So all of that to say is that today's modern job search is not about just you being the one to chase and be a successful chaser. You've also got to be the best catcher. You got to catch every single ball that comes your way at the curve, the changeup, the screwball, even you got the knuckleball. You've got to be ready to catch them all, in metaphorically speaking, that kind of way. But any final thoughts for us today, Damien, as we get ready to close down?
Just a final thought, and that is technically you're always in a job search mode if you think
Mhm.
about it.
Yeah.
And if you think like that, then you'll do things like track your accomplishments,
Mhm.
um, constantly reach out to people,
Mhm.
become an industry leader by, just like Mark said, I mean, by doing presentations, having them in LinkedIn, being quoted in trade articles so that you bring up your visibility both on LinkedIn and in your particular specialty. Uh, because with the how rapidly things are changing, the top 5 or 10% of folks in a particular field um, don't have to worry about job security because they're constantly being chased with opportunity, and you can do it too.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mark.
you definitely can do it too. And one of the things and you mentioned what I always talk about: job search is a lifestyle now. It's not something that you can get a job and put it off for the next 2 or 3 years and become stale. One of the things I mentioned this past week on the other show is that people get dull in their job search. They're not as sharp as they can possibly be, and especially if they've been on long term. There was an article that was done recently where they talked about long term unemployment. People before the pandemic, it's around 25% of people have been more than a year unemployed, even before the pandemic officially hit last March. So, having said that, people didn't not everyone did their due diligence as far as developing the skills and things like that. And all we're saying is that you've got to be ready for those situations and be ready to be sharper. And if you want me to point you to some resources, I've written some articles about how you can remain sharp. In fact, if you put into the search engine my name, Mark Anthony Dyson, and put remaining sharp while at home, you'll find an article or two about that. So, and we can talk about that, or maybe you want one of us to come talk to your organization or online. We'd be glad to do that, especially for those who are leading kind of free groups, especially, um, or paid. We'll take either. But anyway, you got anything, any articles or podcasts that you're going to be on coming up here soon, Damien?
Yes, actually, on the 30th of March, there is a story that's going to come out in the New York Post. And
Mhm.
then there is a uh, podcast that's going to happen right around that. It's Pittsburgh based, but it's on
Awesome.
Sirius XM. So I
Oh,
can get that information for you.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Be sure we mention that next week so we know where the people can also find more information about you. I want to give a shout out to the Career Thought Leaders Consortium, as I was able to speak to my colleagues in the industry yesterday virtually. It was a lot of fun. Shout out to them. I've got a few podcasts I'm going to be on. I'll let you know when those dates come up. When those dates come out. I think I didn't mention last week I was on the Your Career GPS podcast with Brad and Cassie, giving them a shout out. You can check that out on Your Career GPS in the Apple Music Store or any of your podcast catchers. Of course, you can also look for um, on YouTube, actually, Sonal Ball has interviewed me a couple of Fridays ago on her YouTube Live, which has a large, large audience. In fact, I'm amazed it has hundreds of views now on YouTube. Supercharged Friday. If you Google that and or YouTube that, you'll be able to find it because she has quite a large following. She has more than 11,000 in her subscribership on YouTube.
wow. Wow.
So be sure to look for that. It was a great interview. We went an hour and a half and answer questions
Goodness gracious.
from her. Yet we answer questions from her audience from all around the world, and I really mean literally. You can also probably find that on LinkedIn, but it's probably easier to find it on LinkedIn. I mean, on YouTube. So, other than that, we've went our hour. Thank you very much for joining the Modern Job Search Checklist. Keep on following us for more information through our timelines, and uh, keep it up out here. We'll be out. We'll be out here next week on these LinkedIn streets, trying to give you the best information. You all have a great weekend. Okay.